"Sir, can I slip under your coat?" the young girl whispered. The silent rancher froze in shock. The old train rattled down the dusty rails, cutting through the heart of the wild country. The afternoon sun burned gold through the cracked windows, pouring across the faces of a few weary passengers. One of them sat near the front, a tall, quiet man in a tan coat and a weathered hat pulled low. His hands were calloused, his eyes cold and unreadable. He looked like he'd seen more winters than he cared to count. They called him the silent rancher in the small town of Dovetail, though no one really knew his name. He'd once owned land, cattle, and a family. But after the fire that took his wife and child, he'd sold everything and vanished. Now, he just drifted from one horizon to another, as if chasing ghosts only he could see. Across the aisle, a young woman sat clutching a basket. Her dress was plain, her brown hair tied loosely behind her shoulders. Her face held the softness of someone who had not yet been hardened by the world, but there was something in her eyes, a quiet sadness that mirrored his own. When the train jolted, she nearly lost hold of her basket. He caught it before it fell, his gloved hand steadying it. "Thank you, sir," she whispered. He gave a short nod, his voice still buried somewhere deep. But when she smiled faintly, something stirred inside him, an ache he hadn't felt in years. A few cars back, two men were walking through the narrow aisle. Their boots struck the wooden floor with purpose, their hats low and guns heavy at their sides. The rancher noticed them through the reflection in the window. Trouble had a way of finding him, even when he wasn't looking for it. He leaned slightly toward the girl. "Stay close to me," he muttered. Her brows knit. "Why? Just do it." The men drew closer, the dust from their coats swirling in the slanted light. The first one stopped near the rancher, the other just behind. "Afternoon," the man said with a smirk. "Mind if we have a word?" The rancher's jaw flexed. "I mind. See, we're looking for someone fits your description. Rode into Dovetail last night, left a card game early, and a man dead." The girl's hand trembled against her basket. The rancher met their gaze without flinching. "You're mistaken. Maybe," the man said, glancing toward the girl. "Maybe not. Why don't you come with us, and we'll sort it out proper?" Before he could answer, the girl slipped her hand into his coat sleeve, her voice so soft he almost didn't hear it. "Sir," she breathed, "can I slip under your coat?" He froze. Her words weren't born of fear alone. They were a plea for protection, trust, and something more tender than either of them could name. He didn't know why, but he lifted the side of his coat, letting her lean into him. She hid her face against his chest, trembling. "Now," he said, his tone iron flat, "you boys might want to step off this train before you find more than you're looking for." The men laughed, but there was unease behind it. The rancher's hand was already resting near the revolver on his hip, not drawn, but ready. Silence hung like a drawn bowstring. Then, the train lurched again, screeching as it slowed into a small town station. The men exchanged a glance and stepped back. "We'll see you around, cowboy." He didn't answer. They walked off, their boots fading into the distance. When the train finally stopped, the girl looked up at him. "You didn't have to do that," she said softly. "I know," she smiled faintly, "but I'm glad you did." He helped her down from the train. The town was nothing more than a few wooden buildings and the sound of chickens scratching in the dirt. She walked ahead, the basket swinging lightly at her side. He followed, unsure. Why? Her home was a small, weathered ranch on the edge of the valley. A boy came running from the barn, no older than 6, with hair like sunlight and a face full of mischief. He stopped short when he saw the stranger. "It's all right," the girl said gently. "He helped me." The boy relaxed, curiosity flickering in his eyes. "You're a cowboy?" The rancher gave a slow nod. "Used to be." The girl led him to a worn table outside the barn. The evening light stretched long and golden across the land. She poured water into a clay cup, her hands graceful in the fading sun. "You look like you've been running a long time," she said. He watched her, unable to argue. "Maybe I have. Then rest a while. There's no need to keep running here." Her voice had a quiet strength, the kind that reached through the walls a man built around himself. He took the cup, his fingers brushing hers, and for a moment the world felt still again, like the wind itself had stopped to listen. That night, he sat outside the barn, the stars scattered wide across the black sky. He heard her humming softly as she put the boy to bed. The tune was simple, almost haunting, and it carried him back to another life, one filled with laughter, a woman's voice, a child's small footsteps. He swallowed hard, his hands tightening around the brim of his hat. When she stepped outside, the lantern in her hand cast a warm glow across her face. "You're leaving tomorrow, aren't you?" He nodded. "Will I ever see you again?" He hesitated, then said quietly, "If I don't, remember, don't ever ask a man to protect you unless you're willing to hold part of his burden too." Her eyes softened. "I already am." He looked at her for a long time, the way a man looks at something he knows he'll never truly have but will remember until his last breath. Then he stood, pulling his coat around his shoulders. The night air was cool, the silence deep. As he turned toward the horizon, he felt a gentle tug on his coat. She was standing behind him again, her voice a whisper in the dark. "Sir," she said, almost the same as before, "can I slip under your coat, just one more time?" He didn't answer in words. He opened it quietly, and she stepped into the warmth of his arms. For a moment, the world stopped spinning, the ghosts faded, the ache eased, and in that fragile silence, two lost souls found something like peace. By dawn, he was gone, but she found his hat hanging on the fence post, swaying gently in the wind, as if promising he'd return when the world was kind enough to let him. The wind moved slow over the valley that morning, brushing the tall grass like a memory that refused to fade. The hat he'd left on her fence still swayed on its post, sun-bleached and battered by weeks of weather, but she never took it down. Every dawn she would step out of the barn, pause by that fence, and look toward the horizon where he'd vanished. She told herself she did it to check the fields, to keep watch on the land, but her heart knew better. Days folded into weeks, and the silence of the plains grew heavier. She worked hard to keep the small ranch breathing, hauling water, mending fences, washing clothes, and teaching the boy to help with the chickens and feed the mule. She'd grown used to the rhythm of work and waiting. But sometimes, when the dusk came soft and gold, she'd find herself listening for a sound that didn't belong. The distant clop of hooves, the slow creak of a saddle, the voice that could break or heal her all at once. And one evening, that sound came. It was faint at first, barely louder than the wind sliding through the trees. Then came the rhythm, slow, steady, deliberate. The boy was stacking feed sacks near the barn when he froze. "Ma," he called quietly, his small voice trembling. "There's someone coming." She stepped out, wiping her hands on her apron, her heart leaping like a trapped bird. The sun was sinking low, turning the sky the color of old whiskey. Down the dirt road, a horse moved through the haze of dust, tall, chestnut brown, carrying a man with a wide-brimmed hat and a coat that looked too familiar. Her throat tightened. She didn't move, not until the horse stopped by the fence. The man dismounted slowly, his boots landing in the dry earth with the weight of years behind them. He looked older, not by much, but enough for her to see it in the lines at his eyes, the way his shoulders carried something unseen. "You came back," she said softly. He took off his hat, dust swirling around his boots. "Reckon I did." The boy peeked from behind her, half curious, half shy. The rancher looked at him and something flickered in his eyes, a pain, or maybe longing. He tipped his hat gently to the child. "You've grown some." The boy's eyes widened. "You remember me?" The rancher's lips curved faintly. "A man don't forget much round here." The woman took a step closer, her voice almost a whisper. "Why'd you leave?" He looked down at the ground. "Sometimes a man thinks he's protecting people by staying away. Sometimes he just don't know how to stay." She folded her arms, watching him carefully. And now, he raised his gaze, and the way he looked at her, steady, almost desperate, made her breath catch. "Now I reckon I learned what loneliness costs." For a moment, neither spoke. The air between them was thick with everything unsaid, everything that had grown in the silence. Finally, she motioned toward the barn. "You can put your horse there. Supper'll be ready soon." He nodded, a small flicker of gratitude in his eyes. That night, the sound of the wind outside the cabin seemed softer than usual. The fire crackled low in the hearth, painting the walls in shades of amber. She sat across the table from him, hands folded, watching him eat quietly. The boy sat between them, eyes darting from one to the other as though afraid to miss something important. When the meal was done, she cleared the plates. The boy yawned and shuffled off to his cot. The rancher stood and helped her carry the bucket to the basin. "You don't have to," she said gently. He looked at her. "Maybe I want to." Her lips twitched with a faint smile. "You still talk like a man used to silence." He set the bucket down. "Silence is safer, but not always right." For a long moment, they stood there, the glow of the fire between them, the space charged with something fragile and real. Then she took a quiet breath. "What brought you back?" He looked toward the window, where the moonlight spilled across the floor. "Word travels fast out west. I heard your name spoken by a man in town. Said a woman and her boy were living out here alone. Said some folks been riding by, asking questions. The kind that don't end good." Her brow furrowed. "Questions. About me," he said simply. "Reckon I made enemies that don't forgive easy." The fear flashed in her eyes, but she masked it quickly. "You think they'll come here?" He nodded once. "I know they will." She turned away, her voice low. "And you brought that here with you?" He stepped closer, his voice roughened by guilt. "I brought myself here, and I ain't leaving you to face what's coming." The fire popped, sending a shower of sparks into the chimney. She turned back to him, her eyes searching his face. "You could have just kept riding. You didn't have to care." He looked at her the way a man looks when the truth costs him. "Maybe I didn't have to. But I wanted to." The silence stretched between them again, but this time it wasn't cold. It was warm and aching, like the slow heartbeat of something coming alive after too long buried. The next morning, the rancher was already up before dawn, tending to the horse, checking the fence lines, scanning the horizon. The boy followed him around, full of questions that the rancher didn't mind answering. It felt strange, this small rhythm of family, the laughter, the sound of footsteps in the dust, the smell of coffee in the air. Strange, but right. By the third day, he'd fixed the porch rail, sharpened her tools, and mended half the roof. She tried to thank him, but he only shrugged. "Just earnin' my keep." But the truth was, he wasn't doing it for that. He was doing it because every hammer strike, every nail, every board put between them and the world felt like redemption. Late one afternoon, as the sun burned low, he caught sight of something far off, a line of dust cutting through the horizon. Riders. 4, maybe 5, moving slow, steady. He tightened his jaw. That night, he loaded his revolver and checked the rifle by the door. She watched him quietly from the table, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea gone cold. "Will it come to that?" she asked. "I hope not," he said. "But I've learned hope ain't much of a shield." She stood, walking toward him. The firelight brushed her face, soft and fierce all at once. "You saved us once already," she said. "You don't have to do it again alone." He met her gaze, his hand trembling slightly as he adjusted the rifle strap. "If anything happens," she cut him off, stepping closer until she could see the fear behind his steadiness. "Don't," she whispered. "Don't say goodbye before it's time." He nodded, silent. At dawn, the riders came. Dust rose behind them like smoke, and the sound of hoofs cracked the morning calm. The boy hid inside, clutching his mother's hand. The rancher stood on the porch, coat flapping in the wind, hat pulled low, eyes fixed on the approaching men. They reined in their horses a few yards from the gate. The leader, a scarred man with a dark hat, grinned wide. "Heard you been hiding out here, cowboy. Thought we'd stop by and pay our respects." The rancher's hand rested near his revolver. "Ain't much to respect in your kind." The man laughed. "Still got that mouth, huh? You cost us a lot in Dovetail. Thought maybe you'd be smart enough to keep running." "I stopped running," the rancher said, his voice quiet, deadly steady. "Found something worth standing for." The man's grin faded. "You really think that woman and her brat are gonna make you soft enough to die for 'em?" The rancher's jaw tightened. "I think you've said enough." The first shot came quick, sharp as thunder. The rancher dove for cover behind the trough, returning fire. Bullets ripped through the air, splintering wood and kicking up dust. The horses screamed, the boy cried out inside, and the woman dragged him behind the table. The fight was fast, brutal, echoing across the valley like the end of the world. When the smoke cleared, 3 of the riders lay motionless in the dirt. One was crawling away, clutching his shoulder. The leader was gone, vanished into the hills with a trail of blood behind him. The rancher stood there, chest heaving, his arm bleeding from a graze. She ran to him, tears streaking her face. "You're hurt." He looked down at her, half smiling through the pain. "Not the first time." She pressed her hand to the wound, voice shaking. "Why did you come back?" He caught her wrist gently. "Because this time, I had somewhere worth coming back to." That night, as the fire burned low and the boy slept beside the hearth, she bandaged his arm in silence. Outside, the world was quiet again, the kind of quiet that comes after survival. When she finished, he reached for her hand. "You and the boy, you're safe now. But there'll always be more men like them. I can't keep bringing that danger here." She looked up sharply. "You can't leave again." "I have to," he said softly. "Not forever. Just long enough to make sure they don't come back. To end it." Tears welled in her eyes. "You think the world's just gonna stop spinning because you chase your ghosts?" He cupped her face gently, thumb brushing her cheek. "No, but maybe I can make it spin a little easier for you." She leaned into his touch, trembling. "And if you don't come back this time?" He hesitated, then said quietly, "Then at least you'll know I wanted to." The next morning, he saddled his horse again. The boy stood by the fence, eyes wet, clutching a small carved piece of wood the rancher had whittled for him the night before. "Will you come back?" the boy asked. The rancher knelt, resting a hand on his shoulder. "I'll always try." The woman stood a few feet away, arms wrapped around herself, her hair glowing in the dawn. He looked at her one last time, then swung into the saddle. As he rode off, she whispered to the wind, "Sir, can I slip under your coat?" But the words were carried away before they could reach him. He didn't hear them, but he felt them, deep in the place where memory and love share the same ache. For days he rode through the barren land, following the trail of the scarred man, tracking him across rivers and through canyons where the only sound was the wind's hollow cry. He barely slept, barely ate, living on anger and duty. When he finally found the man, it was near an abandoned outpost, half buried in dust. The final fight was short, brutal, and when it was done, the rancher stood bleeding, the outlaw still beneath his boots. He looked at the sky, at the endless blue stretching beyond everything. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel empty. He turned his horse west, toward the ranch, toward the woman, toward the boy, and though he was weak, and though the road was long, he rode anyway. Back at the ranch, days passed, then weeks. She waited, the way she always did, tending the fields, teaching the boy, living between hope and heartbreak. Each night she lit a lantern and set it by the window, its glow a beacon in the dark. And one late evening, when the sun had slipped beneath the horizon and the first stars had come out, she heard it again, the faint rhythm of hooves. The lantern trembled in her hand. She stepped out to the porch. The hat still hung on the fence, swaying in the soft wind. From the road, a figure emerged through the dust. Worn, wounded, but real. The boy shouted, running toward him. She followed, tears streaking her face. The rancher slid off the horse, nearly collapsing, but she caught him before he hit the ground. "I told you," he whispered weakly, "I'd try." She smiled through her tears. "You did more than try." He looked at her, eyes heavy, voice barely a breath. "Mind if I rest a while?" Her arms tightened around him, her voice shaking but sure. "You're home now." The wind moved slow again over the valley, carrying the scent of dust, wild grass, and something else, the fragile piece of two souls who had finally found their way back. And this time, when she slipped under it, where she'd always belonged. The night stretched long over the valley, the stars burning white against a cold sky. Inside the small cabin, the lantern flickered low, casting soft light across the wooden walls. The woman sat beside him, his head resting against her lap, his breathing slow and uneven. She'd cleaned the wound on his side, stitched it as best she could, her trembling hands guided more by instinct than skill. He stirred once, muttering something, half coherent about the trail, about dust and blood and someone's name she didn't recognize. She brushed his hair from his forehead, her heart heavy with the weight of everything he'd carried home. For the first time, she saw how tired he truly was, not just from the fight, but from the years of running that had carved their lines into his face. When dawn came, The light spilled across the floor, and the boy was the first to wake. He tiptoed close, peering down at the man who'd once ridden away and now returned like some weary ghost made flesh again. "Is he gonna be okay, Ma?" She nodded, though she wasn't sure. "He's strong. Stronger than most." By the second day, he was sitting up, though the color hadn't yet returned to his cheeks. She made him broth, watched him drink it slowly, the silence between them gentle but full of things they couldn't yet say. He looked at her over the rim of the tin cup. "Did I dream it?" he asked quietly. "Dream what? Comin' back here. Feels too good to be real." She smiled faintly, her eyes soft but guarded. "You're real enough, though I thought the wind had swallowed you whole." He chuckled low, the sound rough from disuse. "Almost did. Caught up to the bastard that started it all. Didn't have much left when I was done." "You killed him?" she asked. He nodded once. "Couldn't leave him walkin' free. Not after what he done." She didn't press further. There was blood in that story, and ghosts enough between them already. That evening, she sat on the porch while he rested. The boy played in the dirt, drawing shapes with a stick. The air was cool, the land quiet except for the distant cry of a hawk circling high above. For a moment, life felt still, like the storm had passed. But peace is a fragile thing in the West. 3 nights later, as the moon hung low and full, the rancher woke to the sound of hooves in the distance. Not one horse, many. He pushed himself up, grimacing at the pull of the half-healed wound. He went to the window. Out across the open plain, a cluster of lights bobbed in the dark, torches. He cursed under his breath. "They found me." The woman stirred. "What is it?" "Riders. Maybe a dozen." Her breath caught. "You said it was over." "I thought it was," he said, reaching for his gun belt. "Guess some debts don't stay buried." She stood, gripping his arm. "Then we run. Take the boy. Head into the hills." He shook his head. "They'd track us before sunrise. The only way through is standin' our ground." She stared at him, fear flickering in her eyes. "You'll get yourself killed." He gave her a faint, tired smile. "Maybe. But I'll make sure you live." Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the sound of distant voices. The boy woke, frightened. The rancher knelt beside him. "You stay with your ma, you hear? Don't come out till she says." The boy nodded, eyes wide. "Are they bad men?" "Bad enough." He stepped onto the porch, the night air cool against his skin. He loaded the rifle, each click echoing through the silence. He'd been here before, outnumbered, outgunned, with nothing but grit and a steady hand. But this time, there was something worth fighting for. The first torch appeared at the edge of the property, then another. Men spread out, forming a half-circle around the house. The leader rode forward, a tall man with a scarred jaw and a cruel grin. "Well, I'll be damned," he called. "Didn't think you had the guts to crawl back here after Dovetail." The rancher lifted the rifle. "You've got one chance to turn around and live." The man laughed. "You still think you're the law, don't you? Ain't no law out here. Just men with faster guns." The rancher's voice stayed calm. "Then you better hope yours is faster." The first shot cracked the night. The leader jerked backward, his torch tumbling into the dirt. The men behind him roared, guns flashing. Bullets tore through the air, splintering the porch rail, smashing the window beside the door. The woman dragged the boy behind the table, covering his head. The rancher moved like a ghost through the gunfire, firing, ducking, reloading. He dropped one man, then another. The smell of gunpowder mixed with dust and smoke, choking the air. A bullet caught his shoulder, spinning him sideways. He gritted his teeth, raised the rifle again, and fired until the hammer clicked dry. Then the silence fell, heavy, ringing, broken only by the groan of the wind. When the smoke cleared, 5 men lay still. The rest had ridden off, their torches vanishing into the distance. He staggered back inside, bleeding, half-conscious. The woman caught him before he fell, tears streaking her face. "You fool," she whispered. "You damned fool." He tried to smile. "Still here, ain't I?" She pressed her hand to his wound, her voice breaking. "You keep fighting ghosts. When will it end?" He looked at her through the haze of pain. "When the ghosts stop finding me." He spent the next 2 weeks in the small room by the kitchen, feverish and drifting in and out of sleep. She cared for him day and night, her hand steady, her heart torn between anger and something deeper. The boy brought water, whispered stories to keep him awake, small tales of the land, the animals, the quiet dreams of a child untouched by the weight of sin. When he finally woke fully, the fever gone, the first thing he saw was her asleep in the chair beside him, hair loose, face softened by the light of dawn. He watched her a long time, something in his chest easing for the first time in years. He whispered her name, though she didn't stir. Outside, the valley was alive again, birds calling, the wind gentle. He stood, weak but steady, and stepped out into the morning. The land stretched wide and endless, golden under the sun. For the first time, he didn't feel like running. When she woke and found him outside, leaning against the fence, she came to stand beside him. "You should be resting." He looked at her, eyes clear. "Rest can wait. I reckon I owe this land something." She smiled faintly. "You owe it not dying on it." He chuckled, the sound rough but warm. "Fair enough." They worked together through the days that followed, fixing the fence, tending the small herd, teaching the boy to ride. The air between them softened, laughter returning like an old friend they'd forgotten. Sometimes, at sunset, he'd sit with her on the porch, the boy asleep inside, and they'd watch the sky burn itself out over the hills. Those were the quiet hours, the kind that made the pain of the past seem far away. One evening, as the first stars appeared, she turned to him. "Do you ever think about leaving again?" He shook his head slowly. "Used to think I didn't belong anywhere. But every time I look out there," he nodded toward the open land, "I see something that feels a little like home. You and the boy made that." She looked down, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't want to lose you again." He reached for her hand, rough and warm. "Then you won't." The wind rustled through the grass, the sky deepening into indigo. Somewhere out there, the west kept turning, hard and unforgiving, but here, on this small patch of earth, life had found a way to be gentle again. She leaned into him, her head against his shoulder, and for the first time, he didn't think about what might come next. He just breathed, the smell of dust, firewood, her hair, the quiet rhythm of the boy's soft sleep inside. Tomorrow would come, as it always did, with its troubles and its tests. But tonight, there was peace, and that was enough. The following morning dawned quiet, the kind of hush that made the land feel like it was holding its breath. A thin mist clung to the valley floor. The rancher rose before the sun, his shoulder bandaged but stiff, and went down to the corral. The horses shifted restlessly. They could feel when something had changed in a man. He moved among them slowly, touching each flank, murmuring low, the way he once did with his cattle when he'd owned half a county of land. The woman stepped out with 2 cups of coffee, her shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders. "You didn't sleep," she said. He took one of the cups. "Didn't need to. Too much thinking to do." She studied him in the pale light. "About what?" "About how long peace lasts out here. About what a man's supposed to do when the past keeps showing up on his doorstep." She gave a faint smile. "Maybe stop answering the door." He almost laughed. "Maybe." They drank their coffee in silence, the steam curling between them. Down the hill, the boy ran barefoot through the wet grass chasing a dog he'd somehow managed to befriend. For a heartbeat, the rancher thought, this is what it should have been all along. A place, a family, a morning that didn't end in gunfire. By midday he'd saddled a horse and was riding the fence line. The sky stretched open and blue above him. He scanned the hills, always half expecting a rider, a flash of metal, a sign that the world still wanted something from him. But nothing came, until late afternoon. Dust again, far off, a single rider this time, moving slow and careful. When the figure grew closer, he recognized the badge pinned to the vest. Law. The rancher reined in and waited. The sheriff pulled up beside him, a lean man with a kind of worn patience in his eyes. "Heard there was shooting out here," he said. "There was," the rancher answered. "Bodies found down near the river. Folks say you were involved." "I was." "You plan on telling me why?" The rancher hesitated, then told him everything. The men, the torches, the fight. The sheriff listened without interrupting. When he finished, the sheriff nodded slowly. "Self-defense, by the sound of it. That what you'll write down?" "That's what's true." He adjusted his hat. "You've had a long road, son. Word of you's been riding ahead for months. Some say you're a killer, some say you're a hero. I don't much care which, long as you don't bring more blood into my county. I ain't looking for trouble, the rancher said. The sheriff's gaze softened. Then maybe it's time you stopped looking over your shoulder. He touched his brim and turned his horse back toward town, leaving the rancher alone with the wind. When he returned to the cabin, she was waiting on the porch. "Lawman?" she asked. He nodded, said it's over, for now. She let out a long breath she'd been holding for weeks. "Then stay," she said simply. "Just stay." He did. Days turned into a pattern again. Repairing the barn, hauling feed, teaching the boy to rope and ride. The woman's laughter began to return, not the forced kind, but real laughter, the kind that came from somewhere deep and unguarded. At night they'd sit by the fire, talking in low voices about the land, the rain, the future. One evening the boy climbed into the rancher's lap with a book, the edges of the pages frayed. "Ma says you can read real good," the boy said. The rancher smiled. "Used to, when I could see straight." He read anyway, his deep voice filling the small room with a story about brave men and wide skies. The woman listened from the stove, her eyes shining in the lamplight. After the boy had fallen asleep, she lingered near the doorway. "He's starting to look up to you." The rancher set the book aside. "That a bad thing?" "No, just means you'll have to keep living long enough to teach him better." He looked into the fire. "That's the plan." Spring rolled in with sudden rain. The earth came alive again, green pushing through the brown, the creek rising high and loud. For a few months the valley forgot what pain looked like. But the world doesn't forget men like him so easily. Late one afternoon, a wagon rattled down the road from town. The sheriff climbed down with 2 deputies. The rancher met them halfway. The sheriff's expression was grave. "More of the Dovetail gang. Survivors. They hit a stage outside Laramie. Killed 3 men and a woman. One of them was talking before he died. Said they're coming for you." The rancher's stomach turned cold. "How many?" "Half a dozen, maybe more. You got time to get your folks to safety." He looked back toward the house where the woman stood in the doorway, the boy clinging to her skirt. "No," he said quietly. "If they come here, I finish it here." The sheriff studied him a long moment. "You sure that's the hill you want to die on?" He gave a thin smile. "It's the only hill that's mine." When the lawman rode off, he went inside. The woman's eyes were already asking the question. "They're coming," he said. Her voice trembled. "Then we go. We take the boy, head south." He shook his head. "They'd find us on the road. I've run enough." She stepped close, grabbing his arm. "You think dying here's gonna make it right? You think that boy needs another ghost in his life?" Her words hit deep, but he didn't answer. He couldn't. That night he packed ammunition, filled the canteens, checked the rifle again. The woman moved quietly behind him, her breath ragged, tears threatening. Finally she said, "If you're set on staying, then I'm staying too." He turned sharply. "No, I mean it," she said, standing her ground. "I ain't hiding. Again while you bleed for both of us." He looked at her, really looked, and saw the same stubborn fire that had kept her alive all these years. "You'll do what I say," he said softly. She held his gaze. "Not anymore." Before dawn they were both outside, building barricades, setting traps along the road. The boy slept inside, unaware of the storm moving closer. By sunrise, the sky had gone gray, clouds heavy and low. The first shot came mid-morning, echoing through the valley like thunder. Then the riders appeared, 6 of them, guns drawn, faces hidden behind scarves. The rancher took position behind the wagon. The woman crouched by the window with a rifle she'd never fired at a person before. The boy, awake now and crying, stayed hidden beneath the table. Gunfire ripped through the air. Wood splintered. Smoke rolled. He dropped one rider clean through the chest. Another fell screaming into the dirt. But there were too many, circling, closing in. A bullet struck the post near the window, grazing the woman's arm. She gasped, dropped the rifle. The rancher turned at the sound, eyes wide. "You hit. Just a scratch," she said, though blood ran down her sleeve. He fired again, fury burning through the pain in his shoulder. 2 more fell. The rest hesitated, realizing this fight wasn't worth the graves waiting for them. They turned and fled into the hills, their hoofbeats fading into the distance. When it was over, the valley went still again. Smoke curled from the wagon. The woman leaned against the wall, shaking. The rancher stumbled inside, blood on his hand but still breathing. She looked at him through tears. "You did it. It's done." He sank into the chair by the table, his chest heaving. "It's never done," he whispered. "But maybe it's enough." The boy ran to him, throwing his arms around his neck. "You're not leaving again," the child said fiercely. The rancher closed his eyes, one hand resting on the boy's back. "No, son, I'm home." Outside, the wind began to rise, sweeping away the smoke, carrying with it the last echoes of gunfire. The valley breathed again. For the first time, he felt the weight lift. Not all of it, but enough to make room for something else. The future. He stood, walked to the doorway where she waited, pale and trembling but unbroken. "You saved me," he said simply. She smiled through the tears. "We saved each other." The rancher reached out, drew her close, and for once there was no fear in the touch, no shadow of leaving. Just the steady, quiet rhythm of two hearts learning how to rest. The wind moved through the grass like a hymn. Far off, thunder rolled, distant, harmless, fading. And for that small stretch of land beneath the endless sky, peace finally felt like something that might last. By summer the valley had grown wild with color again. The rains had been kind, and the grass came in high and soft, hiding the old scars in the land. The rancher moved slower now, his shoulder healed but stiff, his hair touched with more gray than before. Each morning he rose to the sound of the boy laughing somewhere near the barn, the woman humming as she kneaded dough by the window. The quiet had a rhythm now, something alive and steady. He'd taken to fixing up the place bit by bit. New planks for the fence, a proper roof for the chicken coop, even a second corral so the boy could train his own colt. Sometimes travelers passed through and asked if this was still the Caldwell place. He'd tell them no, this was just home. In town, folks still talked about the gunfight that ended the Dovetail gang. Some swore there'd been 10 men, others said 12. Each retelling made him a little more ghost than man. He didn't mind. Let the world make stories. He was done being one. The woman came out one evening with a letter in her hand, paper worn soft from being folded too many times. "From the sheriff," she said, handing it to him. He broke the seal and read. The handwriting was rough but plain. "Your name's been cleared in 3 counties. If you ever want to come back, there's land to the west that needs a good man." He stared at the words for a long moment before folding the paper carefully. "I think I'll stay right here." She smiled, knowing he would. "Good. The boy needs you. So do I." They ate supper on the porch that night, watching the sun melt behind the hills. Coyotes called in the distance, and the air smelled of sage and rain. The boy, half asleep between them, leaned his head on the rancher's arm. "Tell me a story," he mumbled. "What kind? About when you were young?" "Before the fighting." The rancher thought for a long time, then began softly. "Once, there was a man who thought the world owed him something. He rode from town to town looking for it. He found nothing but dust and ghosts until one day he met a woman and a boy who didn't owe him a thing, and they gave him everything anyway." The boy's eyelids fluttered shut before he could ask how it ended. The rancher looked over at her. She was smiling faintly, tears glinting in her eyes. "That's a good story," she said. "Still written it," he replied. Weeks passed. The harvest came. The boy grew bolder, riding bareback through the pasture, daring the wind to catch him. The woman's arm healed, leaving only a thin white line. Sometimes at night she'd wake to find him standing by the window, looking out across the moonlit fields. "Still watching for ghosts?" she'd ask. He'd shake his head, just making sure they stay gone. But one evening near autumn, a rider appeared again on the ridge. This one carried no weapon, only a satchel and a tired horse. The rancher went out to meet him, hand resting lightly on his holster. The stranger tipped his hat. "Name's Carter. Sheriff sent me. He said if I was looking for honest work, you might have some." The rancher studied the man's eyes, wary but not cruel. "You any good with horses?" "Better with fences, but I learn quick." He nodded. "Then you can start in the morning." Carter looked around at the wide stretch of land, the woman waving from the porch, the boy chasing a chicken across the yard. You got yourself a fine place here. The rancher's gaze followed the boy. Took a long time to make it that way. That night, as he and the woman sat by the fire, she said, "You think you can trust him?" "Maybe," he said, "but I'm learnin' that a man don't build peace by himself. Takes more hands than two." She smiled at that, the glow of the fire soft on her face. "And what happens when he finds out who you were?" He shrugged. "Then he'll know who I'm not anymore." The days grew shorter. Work filled the hours until there was little room left for the past. The boy began school in town, and the teacher wrote letters home about how bright he was, how he talked about the land and the man who taught him everything about courage. The rancher couldn't read those letters without feeling something ache and settle inside him all at once. One cold morning, frost silvered the grass. He saddled his horse and rode up the ridge alone. The world stretched quiet and endless around him. From up there he could see the smoke rising from the chimney, a single thin line curling into the blue. He thought about all the miles he'd ridden, all the faces lost along the way, and for the first time he didn't feel haunted. He felt whole. When he rode back down, the boy was waiting by the gate, holding something in his small hands, a wooden figure carved rough but careful. "It's you," the boy said proudly. "Ma helped me with the knife." The rancher took it gently, turning it over. The carving was simple. A man with a hat, standing tall beside a horse. He swallowed hard. "Looks better than the real thing." The boy grinned. "You gotta keep it, so you don't forget." He knelt, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. "I won't forget. Not you. Not this." Snow came early that year. The hills turned white, and the world grew quiet again. Nights were long, but warm with fire and laughter. The rancher found himself telling stories more often. Not about blood and loss, but about hope and the strange mercy of the land that still kept them safe. Sometimes, when the wind howled and the shutters rattled, he'd reach for her hand beneath the quilt, and she'd squeeze it once, steady as the heartbeat of the home they'd built together. The legend of the silent rancher would keep spreading, told in saloons, whispered on trails, embroidered with gun smoke and myth. But out here, far from the noise, he was just a man who had finally stopped running. The land held his secret, the woman held his peace, and the boy held his future. And beneath that vast, forgiving sky, the world turned quiet once more. The snow stayed through February, turning the valley into a wide, white ocean where sound went to die. The rancher rose early every day, breaking ice from the troughs, feeding the horses, watching his breath drift like smoke in the cold air. The boy followed him now, smaller boots stepping carefully in his prints. Sometimes they didn't talk at all. Sometimes the boy asked about the stars or the old trails his mother said he used to ride. The rancher would tell him pieces, enough to feed his wonder, but never the whole of it. Some stories weren't meant to live outside a man's chest. The woman watched them from the window, her hands wrapped around a mug, her heart heavy with gratitude and fear. She knew peace like this was rare out here, borrowed time. From a restless world, the land always called its debts. By March, the thaw began. Rivers swelled, fence posts loosened, and the air filled with birds returning from wherever the cold had chased them. The rancher took the boy out riding again, showing him how to read the ground, where deer had passed, where wolves had come down from the ridge. Out here, he told him, everything leaves a story. You just gotta learn how to read it. The boy nodded solemnly. What story do you leave? The rancher smiled faintly, still trying to figure that out. When they returned to the cabin that afternoon, there was a rider waiting by the fence. Not a stranger this time. It was Sheriff Lyle again, older, grayer, with a look that spoke before his mouth did. Didn't think I'd see you out here again, the rancher said, dismounting. Didn't think I'd need to come, the sheriff replied. But word travels fast, and not all of it good. There's a man riding through these parts asking questions about you, about that shootout last year. Claims you took something that belonged to him. I didn't take a damn thing. The sheriff nodded. Didn't figure you did, but this one ain't the kind to ask twice. Thought you should know. The woman stepped out onto the porch, her face pale. Another outlaw. The sheriff glanced at her, then back to the rancher. Worse, a bounty man. The kind who doesn't stop till there's a body to show. The rancher's jaw tightened. You could have sent a letter. I owed you the courtesy of saying it face to face. The two men stood in silence for a long moment, the snow melting around their boots. Then the sheriff said quietly, "You've built something here. Don't lose it over ghosts." When he rode away, the woman came down the steps. "You said it was over." "I thought it was." She shook her head. "They'll never let you rest, will they?" He looked out at the horizon, where the wind carried the smell of thawed earth and trouble. "Maybe not, but I can make sure they don't touch what's mine." That night, the rancher sat by the fire cleaning his rifle. The woman watched him from the doorway. "He's not like the others, is he?" she asked. "No," the rancher said softly. "This one's different. He hunts for coin, not justice. That makes him dangerous. What'll you do?" He looked at the flames, their light dancing in his eyes. "Same thing I always do, stand my ground." Days passed, the tension building like a storm you could smell before you saw. The rancher kept to his work, but every sound carried weight. The creak of the barn door, the crack of ice on the creek, the echo of a horse far off that wasn't one of theirs. On the fourth day, he saw the rider. A dark shape on the ridge, unmoving. The rancher didn't need a closer look to know, bounty man. He sent the boy and the woman inside. "Lock the door," he told her. "No matter what you hear, you stay put." She caught his sleeve. "You can't keep fighting the whole world alone." He brushed his fingers across her cheek, gentle as the wind. "Ain't fightin' the world, just one fool in it." He walked out into the open field, snow crunching under his boots, the rifle hanging easy in his hands. The rider descended the ridge slow, deliberate, until they faced each other across the clearing. "You Reynolds?" the bounty hunter called. "Used to be," the rancher replied. "Now I'm just a man trying to live." The bounty hunter smiled, teeth like bone. "Funny. The poster says you're worth 5,000 alive, 3 dead. I don't much care which." The rancher's eyes hardened. "Then you picked the wrong day to care." The wind held still for a heartbeat. Then everything happened at once. 2 shots cracked through the cold, one from each man. The echo rolled off the hills. Like thunder, snow burst upward where bullets struck. The bounty hunter's horse reared, screaming. The rancher dove behind a stump, rolling, firing again. The second shot caught the man in the shoulder, spinning him half around. He stumbled but didn't fall. "You could have stayed gone," the bounty hunter shouted, blood on his coat. "I did," the rancher growled. "You brought me back." Another round split the air, grazing his hat clean off. He moved low, fast, the way he used to in the wars that never made the papers. He fired once more, clean through the chest. The bounty man dropped like a sack, the snow catching him softly. Silence again. No glory, no cheers. Just the wind and the smell of gunpowder. The rancher walked over slowly, standing above the body. The man's eyes were still open, disbelief frozen in them. He knelt, took the badge from his belt, the proof men always needed, and tossed it aside. When he turned, she was there at the edge of the yard, tears bright in her eyes. "You said no more killing." He looked at her, weary beyond words. "He left me no choice." She came closer, her hand trembling as she touched his arm. "And what happens when the next one comes?" He didn't answer. The boy ran out then, barefoot in the melting snow, flinging himself into his arms. The rancher lifted him, holding him tight. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so damn sorry." They buried the bounty hunter at the edge of the field, under a cedar tree where the snow would melt last. No marker, just another man swallowed by the land. That night, the rancher sat alone on the porch. The stars hung low, sharp and endless. The woman came out quietly, wrapping a blanket around his shoulders. "You can't keep carrying all that weight," she said softly. "You'll break under it." He stared at the horizon. "I've been breaking for years. Just takes longer each time." She knelt beside him, her voice trembling. "Then let it break. Let it go. You don't have to be the man the world made you." He looked at her. Really looked, and for the first time, he believed her. He reached for her hand, rough fingers curling around hers. The wind shifted, gentle now, as if the land itself was exhaling. When dawn came, the valley looked different, not because the snow had melted, but because he finally saw it as home, not a hiding place. Spring came in slow, soft breaths, the way healing does when it's real. The thaw turned the valley into a sea of green and mud. Every morning the sun stretched a little higher, and the land that had once carried only ghosts began to breathe again. The rancher spent his days fixing what the storm and the winter had broken: fences, the roof, himself. The boy followed him everywhere, mimicking every step, carrying a hammer too heavy for his hand. At first, the rancher didn't talk much. He'd wake with the dawn, stand on the porch, and stare toward the ridge where he'd buried the bounty hunter. Sometimes the woman would join him, silent too, as though they both knew peace had to be earned by quiet. But as the weeks passed, the air around them lightened. She began to hum again when she worked. The boy's laughter started to carry farther across the fields. One morning, as the first blossoms of wild clover opened in the grass, she came to him with a folded paper in her hand. "It came from the sheriff again," she said. "He took it but didn't open it. You already read it." "I did. He says there's no more bounty on your name. It's done, for good this time." The rancher stared at the letter, then tossed it into the fire barrel. It caught and curled, burning to ash in seconds. "Paper don't change much," he said. "But maybe it's a start." She smiled faintly. "You always did have a way with half a start." The boy came running then, holding a wildflower in his small hand. "Ma, look what I found." He held it out proudly, petals trembling in the wind. The rancher lifted him onto the fence rail and said, "Keep that one. The land don't give gifts easy." The days grew longer. He began to ride again, not out of fear, but out of something that felt like belonging. The horse moved slow beneath him, the trail winding through hills that now looked less like borders and more like home. He carried no rifle, just a lasso and a small knife. One evening he rode out to the ridge at sunset. From up there he could see the whole valley, fields gold in the light, smoke curling from the cabin chimney, the woman and the boy hanging laundry in the yard. It hit him then. All the running, all the killing, all the miles behind him had led to this single, ordinary peace. The kind men like him almost never get to keep. He took off his hat, pressed it against his chest, and whispered, "Thank you," not to anyone in particular. Maybe to the land, maybe to the ghosts, maybe to the God he'd forgotten how to pray to. When he rode back down, the boy met him halfway. "Ma says supper's ready. You better hurry before I eat all the beans." The rancher grinned. "Then I best not waste a second." That night, they ate under the open sky. The woman had cooked stew. The fire crackled soft, and the boy talked about everything he'd seen that day, words tumbling out like he couldn't keep up with his own excitement. The rancher listened, half smiling, half lost in the music of it. When the stars came out, the woman leaned against him and said, "You ever think about leaving again?" He looked at her, at the boy asleep beside the dying fire, at the hills that held the shape of every road he'd ever ridden. "No," he said quietly. "Not anymore. But the world always tests a man's peace before it lets him keep it." In late summer, a storm rolled in from the west, black and mean. Lightning struck the far ridge, setting the dry brush ablaze. The fire moved fast, pushed by wind that roared like the end of days. By the time he saw it, the smoke had already thickened into a wall. "Get the boy to the creek," he shouted, running for the horses. The woman didn't argue. She scooped the child into her arms and ran through the smoke while the rancher fought the fire line. He cut a trench, beat at flames with a wet blanket, coughed until his lungs burned. Sparks leapt and fell around him like angry stars. He thought the wind might take everything. But then the rain came. Sudden, heavy, merciful. It slammed down in sheets, quenching the fire almost as fast as it had risen. When it was done, the land steamed and smoked, black but alive. He found her and the boy by the creek, soaked and trembling but safe. The woman ran to him, her face streaked with soot and tears. "I thought I'd lost you." "Not yet," he said, pulling her close. "Not ever, if I can help it." For a long moment, they just stood there in the rain, the boy between them, the ashes of the storm washing away into the earth. Weeks later, the grass began to grow again where the fire had passed. Green always finds a way. So did they. The rancher rebuilt what had burned. Fences, barns, habits of silence. The woman planted flowers near the porch, and the boy carved a small wooden sign that read simply, "Home." As the years stretched on, the valley forgot the gunfights, the bounty posters, the graves. But some nights, when the wind blew from the west, the rancher would sit outside with a cup of coffee and look up at the stars. He'd think about all the men he'd been, the soldier, the drifter, the outlaw, and feel something close to forgiveness. The boy grew into a man before his eyes. Strong, good-hearted, full of the same quiet fire his mother had carried. He took over most of the work, his hands rough, his laugh loud. The rancher started to let go, little by little, like a man setting down a heavy saddle after too many miles. On one golden autumn evening, when the air smelled of pine and smoke, he rode up the ridge one last time. His horse moved slow, as though it understood the weight of the ride. From the top, he looked down on the valley, his valley, and the sun setting in a blaze of copper and red. He thought of the day he'd first come here, half dead and ready to vanish. Of the girl who'd whispered for shelter, of the boy who'd called him father without being told to. Of the woman who'd stood by him even when she was shaking with fear. He smiled, a small thing, but real. When he came back down, the boy, now grown, was waiting by the barn. "Everything all right, Pa? Couldn't be better." The boy handed him a piece of wood, freshly carved. It was another figure, this time not a man alone, but three, a man, a woman, and a child, standing side by side beneath a sky full of stars. The rancher turned it over in his hands, eyes shining faintly in the twilight. "You always did know what to say without words." That night, as they sat by the fire, the woman leaned close and whispered, "You finally stopped running." He looked at her, at the glow of the flames reflected in her eyes. "No," he said softly. "I just found somewhere worth running to." Outside, the wind moved through the grass, carrying with it the faint sound of water over stone. The mountains stood dark and steady, and the stars, those same old stars that had watched every battle, every road, every sorrow, shone brighter than they ever had before. And somewhere in that quiet, the land itself seemed to exhale, as if it, too, had been waiting for this ending. The silent rancher closed his eyes, his arm around the woman, the warmth of the fire brushing against his face. The boy, his boy, slept nearby, the future rising with each slow breath. The world, for once, asked nothing more of him. And for the first time in a life of dust and thunder, he finally felt at peace.